Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and I am really excited to talk to a podcaster who's been doing this a while and has made a lot of shifts in his show. And we're going to talk a lot about that because it's really interesting to see someone who's finding things working and then shifting over time to get it working. So today I've got Alex Terranova on. He is the host of the DreamMason Podcast. Alex is a performance alchemist who was dubbed the anti-excuses coach by Yahoo Finance. He's a breaker of limiting mental beliefs, a sometimes model, wannabe yoga guru, and poet. Legend has that he's fortified with strength from a plant-based diet and was once a reality show villain. Sometimes called the Dream Mason, he has also authored Fictional Authenticity, co-author of the best-selling book Redefining Masculinity, and hosts the DreamMason Podcast, the Frequency Shifter Show, and co-hosts the Coaching Show. Whether it's time to get a reality check, evolve from your financially privileged adolescence, or emerge as a leader, he will get you grounded and present your impact and connected to what deeply matters to you. So let's talk the DreamMason Podcast and look at all the different ways you might be able to adjust and shift your show to fit your growing authority, your growing business, just like Alex Terranova. Alex, thanks for joining me. And we're going to talk the DreamMason Podcast today. Why just start the DreamMason Podcast?
First of all, your voice is like, I just like how you just, it's like such a radio, you have such a good radio voice. It's so traditional. Why did I start the DreamMason Podcast? I used to listen. I lived in New York City, and I was on subways all the time. And you can download podcasts, right? You can't like download the radio. And I'd come from LA where, while yes, at times I would listen to like CDs or things, at that time in my life, right? And then we would start connecting our phones. Growing up in LA, you also would listen to the radio at times, right? You'd listen to like the different radio stations. And I went to New York and you couldn't do that. It was only what you had on your phone. And right. So I would go in the subway and I would read I had a subway book that I would only read in the subway, but subways can be pretty crazy, right? With noise and whatnot. And I needed some other factor, like to control the noise. So I started listening to podcasts, which I could do while I was reading. It was like the subtle distraction actually really worked well for my brain. And I fell in love with them that way. So then eventually I found myself like I'd be in the kitchen cooking dinner, listening to podcasts. And I was sharing podcasts with people. And this all happened at a point in my life where I was trying to improve my life, make myself better. And I noticed that a lot of these people were helping me do that. A lot of these podcasts were giving me ideas, giving me books to read, giving me meditations to go find and all these things. And when I was building my business, I kind of felt like I could not only do it, but if I'm enjoying it so much, wouldn't I like to contribute? And I really started it for myself. I didn't know if anybody was going to listen. So it was kind of like, let's have fun. If I get to interview some pretty impressive people, I'm going to get to learn from them, which will be pretty cool. Like that, just the fact that you get to interview somebody that you may have never met. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And then next thing I knew, I fell in love. I would wake up excited to podcast. And to me, follow your feelings, especially when they're happy, joy, inspiration, chase that. And so
yeah, you loved
just kept
it.
doing
so
it.
And it shows in the show because you have a really fun time with your guests. Like you can see you're learning something from them. You're intrigued. You're a really active listener. So that's obvious. Thanks. In the way that the shows, and you've done over 200 episodes. So if it wasn't fun, you wouldn't keep doing it. Right.
Totally. And I've done multiple shows, right? The DreamMason podcast is one. I've done probably 3 or 4 shows of my own or with other people. So I've experimented with other ideas too. And then one of the things I noticed, if it's not fun, I either got to make it fun or it's not actually the right fit and it's time to work on something else. But yeah, the DreamMason podcast is, I don't know how many episodes, but we're definitely over 200.
Yeah. Yeah. So now that you've got your business more developed, does it have an integral place in sort of the marketing of the business or or the way you run your business?
I wish I could say it did more in the sense of I put so much of passion and love into the podcast, and I wish it did translate more like more podcasting, more business. It's also great that I know that it doesn't, because I don't have to think of it like that. What I noticed that it does, along with writing a book, I tell people all the time, often when asked me about the books I've written or my podcasts, do not write a book or start a podcast because you think it's going to make you money. I mean, unless you are, like writing a Harry Potter or you think you're John Grisham, it's probably not going to happen like that. But if you like writing or you like podcasting, you like learning about things or researching things or being creative, by all means. And what I found is the love of it shows up with people that are like on the fence about hiring me, or they like are already a yes to hiring me or working together. And they need that, like, I just want to understand him a little more. I want to get like a little more credibility. A lot of the people that work with me start listening while they're working with me. It starts in the like opposite order. So, I would love to say, and that it does, like, start a podcast and you'll be rich. But I think I would be lying to people. And I think most honest podcast hosts will tell you, I think Seth Rogen says that it's like 1% of podcasts actually drive income.
Yeah. It says less than 2% make any money and less than 1% drive income.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't drive something, like you said,
Totally.
Might shorten the cycle for you to close a client or make sure that you retain clients longer because they're hanging on your every word. So they're more successful. So that can have an effect at the business. Maybe it's just not so direct.
Yeah. And I think it does force you to do other things. Like, I've become such a better speaker because of it, right? Mm-hmm. Practicing speaking, practicing listening, practicing either telling really long stories or telling really short, concise answers. I think the same thing with generating. A lot of people don't realize, people wake up and they're like, I'm in a bad mood, or I'm like this, or this is what's happened during my day. And then they carry those things throughout their life. I think when we're doing podcasting or interacting in this sense, you don't get to do that. You don't get to show up to be a jerk with a guest, and so it forces you, I think, to learn how to say, hey, I need to generate joy right now. I need to generate excitement or curiosity, which if I can do that with you as a guest or as a guest, right? What if I wasn't in the mood to do this today and we had this booked? I can't show up and be a big old baby about it. I gotta show up and bring who I am. And so not only do I teach people that in the work that I do with people, but it was a way for me to practice that. Hey, you got to generate because you say so, not because you feel like it.
Right. Now, you were listening to podcasts before you became a podcaster. And the ironic part is I interview a lot of podcasters who are not listeners. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you there's a distinctive difference in the shows from people who are listeners first.
Interesting.
And there's a couple of aspects of that. But so I'm curious as to when you were starting your show and setting it up, did you set yourself some quality criteria? Did you model yourself after any other shows that you really liked? Did you think about those things as you were setting up your podcast for the first time and launching it?
Yeah, I would be lying if I didn't say that Lewis Howes was a really big influence. He was one of the early podcasts that I found. He was one of the first that I was binging, and I felt like I identified with him as like a man. Like, I felt like in a lot of ways I connected with who he was. And this is like 5-6 years ago. And at that time, there were a lot of things that I was like, I could do this like that, right? Like I could be that. And I didn't know what I was doing. So I did model a lot of who I would show up as a podcast on. And I would look at things like, oh, I don't like this. I want to do this a little different, right? So you could take the things that you do like or don't like. Then as I went forward, I haven't listened to actually his podcast in a long time. I started listening to Akimbo, Seth Godin's, And I got really into Seth Godin's, which had me want to do solo episodes, right? Where I could write something out and really think something through and present an idea. And
you call them your Monday microdose.
So there are Monday microdoses, which those are something I made up. Those were 2 or 3 minutes, right? Those are short, right? Microdose, tiny little, essentially droplets of wisdom or knowledge. There are some episodes layered in the 200 that are like 30, 40-minute episodes. Sometimes they're 20 minutes, which is me talking about a topic, right? Just sharing an opinion. It's like an editorial, right? And I really enjoyed those. Those took a lot more energy, right? Because I had to prep something. I might have had to do a little research. So I didn't necessarily, with a guest, I didn't necessarily have to do as much. But I would experiment. Like the microdoses have been an experiment in 2000 and I think I started them in 2021. It was just a new, hey, let's try this new thing. The solo episodes were like, let's try this new thing. And so I would take things from places or see things that I liked and incorporate them or take things out. And I've done that with different things. So there's probably 3 or 4 more people that I could say have inspired me and helped me. But the more I also would say that I podcast, the less I do listen to podcasts because I just get worn out. It's like
you just get worn out. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I have so many shows that I have to listen to now. So, you have to listen to them because I'm checking them out for work. So it makes it harder to podcast for enjoyment and listen for enjoyment anymore. Right. So, yeah. So you got all these different styles of shows. So you've got some interview shows, you've got these Monday microdose shows. Repurposing. Let's talk about that. So, are you reusing your content on social media or what are you doing that is really helping you? And we're going to talk in a minute about doing live video, but let's put that on the table for a moment. But are you reusing this content in ways that you think is helping your business or is successful in getting you listeners?
100%. Without a doubt, it's also one of the things I tell other newer people to do all the time. If the coaches right? If anybody's in the world of social media or creating content, like how can you not repurpose? It seems it's so wasteful to not, because the same people that listen to your podcast necessarily don't look at your Instagram or your LinkedIn. The people that read your book don't listen to your podcast, right? All those things. So I repurpose a lot. And the way that I do it is the Monday microdoses are actually repurposed. They're social media content that I really like, that then I can add my voice to, add tone, inflection, like add that part of my personality and then give it to people who, are not going to read the comments on a social media post. They just look at the photos or whatever. And now I can actually give them the content, the thing that really matters, not the silly photo that you attach to it. This is cool. I took this from Tim Ferriss and we're doing it our own way, but I hired an editor recently and a publisher to take all of my podcasts and we're turning them into. So we're going through all the episodes and taking the highlights of all the different people and creating sections and using those sections in different ways to organize the basically the greatest moments of the guests. And then I'm going to go back and say what I learned from each person. We're going to ask the guests if they want to write an additional 100 or 200 words about, whatever they want really to include. And I'll have another book that is it has some new content in it, but is also in a great way to repurpose all this old content.
And a great way to promote the podcast as a whole, because people are going to want to find out these are the older guests. Who's the newest one, right? Who's next?
So, absolutely. It's also fun too, right? To have that, to be able to have that on my shelf. And I can't put a podcast on my shelf.
No, you can't. It's so funny though, because I'm a real reader. So I was probably a reader first before I became a podcast listener, and I still listen, but I won't listen to books on audio. I draw the line there. I'll listen to a podcast, but I'm not listening to books on audio. And that's just me.
No, I'm the same.
I have 3 books sitting in my credenza that have not been published yet. My listeners are like, yes, Tracy, we know you still have a book there that has not been published yet, because the podcast has gotten to the point where the podcast is so current and relevant that every time I get to go editing the book, I go, oh, but that's old. We need to now include this one. So it never gets out there. I have to I'd have to stop podcasting in order to put the book out. I think that's where I'd have to live. Anyway, so yeah, kind of funny, but I love that idea that you're putting out a book from your podcast. I love that you're working on the repurposing of things and also using some of your social media successes as inspiration for your show, so that you're kind of cross filtering this content that you're producing. So that's fantastic. Now, one of my favorite parts of your show is that you have this, I'm going to call it longish, because it's not super long. We're talking about like 2 to 3 to 5 minutes, maybe, on a show, sure, where you're talking and sort of setting up kind of a topic, but kind of why you inviting this guest on, but you haven't really even mentioned the guest at the beginning of your show. And then you go, yeah, let's introduce this guest who and then you tie the two things together. And I really love that, because not enough people do that. They jump right into the bio and the intro and the guest. They're so anxious to get there that there's that little place of context that you give. It's one of my favorite parts of your show. It's really what I actually think your binge factor is, because it leads people into that episode and wanting to understand that tie-in. It's kind of what we call open looping, right? You're setting that turn up, and now I'm going to have to listen to make sure that happens in there, right? What's going to happen in there? And that's really great. And it's just a really interesting thing. Is that something you learned from someone? Is that something you sort of developed over time? Or is this naturally you?
So thank you for the compliment. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. I try, something that's really important to me is simply being authentic and living like in the moment and today, not worrying about 2 weeks from now or what happened last week. And I think we would all love to do that, right? It's a thing that we practice. But it makes it really easier to connect with someone when we connect in the present, right? We can all go back to the past and complain and whatnot, but when we really can connect with somebody in the present, I think it's a much more powerful connection. And it is just me, because I don't plan it. Like, I never have if we were about to podcast, I don't sit down with I'm going to sit down with Tracy and here's my preamble and this is how we're going to tie it together. I believe that on the day of a podcast, if I were interviewing you, I would look at your website, I'd look at your Instagram, I'd read over your kind of like questionnaire and what my team has gotten for me. And I do that either the night before, depending on the time of the morning, or I do it the day of. And I simply read it over, look it over, and let it go. So I know who you are, I know what you do, but I'm not obsessed with any one thing that I have to hold on to. Because I noticed from listening to other people's, if 50 people are interviewing you and they've all dug in on this stuff, then they all ask you similar things. And it's kind of boring.
It is.
And if somebody is popular, they've been interviewed 1 billion times and answered the same questions. So what I want to know is I don't want to come in blind and not respect the person and have any, but I want to come in with just enough and not too much that I can still be very, very curious. And so the intro, I think part of the intro is what's happening for me. It's kind of it's my part of the show before they get to be the guest. And I think that I really like to, what my hope is that if I were sharing with you what was going on with my life or what was going on in my space, that you would be able to see something for you as the guest, that you could bounce that back to me. And that's how that's the hope, right? It doesn't always happen.
No, but I think it does for most of the shows, at least most of the episodes that I listen to, is that it's sort of setting a tone for how this conversation is going to go without it being so restricting and guiding. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what you really do there, that's kind of setting the tone nice, because and especially because we're going to talk about this right now, is that, especially now in these live episodes, you have to do that with the person there. See, I don't record. You didn't hear the intro to you.
Sure.
You didn't hear that. So I didn't set that up here, but you're doing it live with them there, and you're setting that up and setting the tone. And so it makes me want to make sure to participate in that place that you're at as a guest on your show. And I think that's really good, because you now have already built in this cooperation between you and your guest that is leading through the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, you say it really well. I don't know that I thought it through to the degree. I would agree that one of the things I love about podcasting is that I think when you do it well, we create a relationship in an hour. or a half an hour, right? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that you told me where you live. I'm not going to say it. I don't know that you share that with the audience, but if I was in your area, I often travel and I text people that have been on my show and I tell them, hey, if you're ever in San Diego where I live, hit me up. I want to grab a drink. Let's grab coffee. Let's take a walk, whatever. And I've noticed that because which just blows my mind that that 1 hour interview, the only time we've ever talked to most of these people, we can create a real connection. And I think what you're speaking to is how that's established is through that share, I get vulnerable often. And maybe that vulnerability allows them to be vulnerable, because my hope, I don't want to say that I want everyone on my show to cry, but I don't mind when they do. I love when somebody comes and they're a business leader and all of a sudden they're sharing about a miscarriage or something that happened in their life that they had to overcome that they never would have expected to share. That we get to see their humanness and we get to see their fortitude and their resilience and their heart. Because again, I think so many of us go on these things and we're doing our greatest hits.
Yeah, right. It's either we're doing that as a guest, or because the show structure is so set in that way, it forces it. It makes you feel like, oh, I gotta be my pro self. So then I pull out my sound bites instead of the conversation. So I love it. And I think now this model that you're working on with doing live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So you're live streaming the actual show itself, and you're going from that. And then of course, creating the podcast in reverse, essentially, right? The podcast happens after, but you're recording it live. Everybody's on at that moment, right? They're all I'm out there sharing this. And so it's a lot more likely that your guests would be more guarded in that live situation, more nervous. And your beginning is got to be helping that. But tell me about why you decided to do the live version of your show, the live stream.
I think that live really ties into how I try to do everything in my life. I think we should experiment with life more often. And you're right. Tim Ferriss is kind of our leader, our president of experimenting with life. And I didn't necessarily get it from him. I got it from my own personal development and my own personal growth of hey, we operate 90%, right? We all know this, that our subconscious mind controls 90% of the way we behave and act and show up. And when I started to work on myself and became a coach, I really realized the only way that we can really experience the fullness of life is to get outside of that 90% or shift that percentage. So I do things for 2020, I went vegan for the entire year on a whim, just let's see how this feels. One of the best decisions I've ever made. I'm about 90% vegan. The experiment ended. As we talked before we recorded, I just did this crazy dating Tulum experiment where I kind of threw myself out online and said, who wants to go to Tulum with me? And I let my friends choose who the winner would be, right? So I put myself at the mercy of a new dating experiment. This year, I started recording videos on the beach every day on my phone and posting them as just a different way to create content and see what would happen. So I'm constantly trying to mix up things in my life to break up the monotony, and anything new then becomes monotonous, right? Those videos on the beach become just the new normal. So then I got to change it. And I think that all of this ties into how I do my podcast. Even now we're having this conversation and I've been in a deep conversation with myself about, we're 200 plus episodes in. I think I'm a very different person than the guy who started this almost 4 years ago. And I want to change. I want to keep the DreamMason podcast, but I want to shift the show a little bit. I want to change it and send it in a new direction. I'm not totally sure how. So I think a lot of the things I've been doing are experimentation. The Monday microdoses were experimentation. I did a whole series on diversity, equality, inclusion. I do the solo episodes, right? I'm doing the live is what you asked me about, which is hey, what if we just just used StreamYard and went live and saw what happened? So a lot of times
you had mentioned to me before that, you thought about producing more videos because, they're doing really well. I'm sure it's because you're finding out that video is doing really well out on social media, right? So you were thinking, I need to do more video, but then that seemed like a lot more work. So why not do them together, right?
And I don't know if you notice this, like sometimes we think about what we like and project it onto other people.
Yeah, it does happen.
I'm never going to watch a 30-minute, I'm never even going to watch a 15-minute thing on YouTube or Facebook. That's just not, if I want to watch something, I watch Netflix or Hulu, right? I watch a produced show. I also know that that's not the whole world, right? There's millions and millions of people watching YouTube and TikTok and long stream videos that are very like unproduced online. And so for me, I'm like, I don't want to do that because it's not what I like. And I think that's a big thing in the business world or podcast world is sometimes it's like, who cares what you like, right? Sometimes what you like is the opposite of what would get you where you want to go. And health is a good example, right? I might not like broccoli, but if I want to be healthier, maybe it's a good idea that I eat broccoli. I don't know. Right?
You're so funny that you say that because I say this to my clients all the time. I was like, if you want me to tell you what the actual hidden secret to podcasting is, it's not your podcast, it's your blog. But you don't want to hear that. 90% of my clients out there don't like blogs, don't like writing, don't like anything about that scares them. And so they don't want to hear that. But it's the truth. And the numbers are there. It says that it's there. And why does it work? And, all of that I can explain to them, but they don't want to hear that because it's not where they are. They like to speak. They're speakers. They're out there. They're doing those things. So, sometimes we have to like almost get ourselves into, like you said, an experiment, get ourselves into this mode so that those things come and they happen. Right. And then we go, I guess that wasn't so bad. Right.
And I think too, nothing happens often as fast as we would like it to, right? I think we would all love to make 5 episodes and be like, oh my God, we're going viral. And it could happen, right? It happens. People make a video and it goes viral. And then they find out that all their videos don't go viral. But for most of us, most of the time, the things we want take a little time. They take consistency, some sort of discipline. Then it requires creativity. And I think one of the when you start doing videos, it's not like all of a sudden my podcast completely like shot up because there's videos. Now it's like you have to market that new thing and you have to nurture that new baby and see what happens. And hey, I think also you have to notice like maybe everybody's show isn't for every medium. I personally, again, I don't want to watch an interview. Why do I need to look at us but other people really like that. I think so. I think people clearly watch Joe Rogan and, Russell Brand and some of these people
for 2 hours.
Right.
I know it's not me. Right. Again. Yeah. So I know we do sometimes resist the things that are not us. Well, I want to touch on our 3 things that we usually do on the show every time, because these become, and I'm explaining this so that our listeners out there understand why I ask you these are, because these are valuable tidbits of information and advice that you're going to give to them, but we repurpose these and we reuse them in other ways. So they become an article in Authority Magazine. They become little stories on Instagram and Facebook and in other places like that. So we're reusing all of these, and sometimes they become little short videos, because sometimes the short videos, as we know, like on TikTok and other places, do better. So that's what this is. And that's why we never miss this segment of the show. Although I'm not a fan of segmenting, and I've shifted it from 5 things to 3 things because that's what's working for us now. So Alex, some tips out there for our audience listening who are aspiring or existing podcasters who want to understand what it takes to increase and engage listeners.
You want 3 or 1?
No, just you give one thing to that. I've got 3 questions total.
Got it. One thing would be you have to generate the love and the excitement for it, because if you're not in love with what you're doing, then the audience is going to know and they're going to feel it.
Yeah. I think that's such good advice, Alex. I think that, that just putting that into the content to beginning, it's like, baking with love, right? It comes out in the cake at the end. So you've got that going for you too. So one other thing, when we are really doing this podcast and we're all in on it and everything, we really want to get to a place where we're getting great guests because we feel like that's our show is amping up, and you've got some good guests on your show. How do you go about getting those great guests?
I've been blown away by how far social media can get you, right? It's like direct messaging people, commenting in people's comments on their right inside of the post, because sometimes we DM people and they get lost in that other folder. But mostly it's those, I think it's those things. It's actually trying to go get them in social media world. But if you can connect with them, again, it comes back to like love. Some of my favorite guests were because I was able to share the difference they made in my life, right? I can't say that about every single guest but the biggest ones that I was the most excited about were the ones that they had an impact on me personally, or someone I knew, that I was able to go share a real message or real personal, like, this is why I would love to talk to you, and this is why it's important. And it wasn't some, nonsense made up thing. And I think a lot of those people did it because they could see the human connection. And also, this kind of goes along with it. If you don't feel that way, maybe they shouldn't be on your show.
Right. You should be pickier, right? I love that. Well, we talked a little earlier, and the third thing that we like to ask questions about is monetization of the show. And you said that you really aren't monetizing your show. You don't have that direct path and message, but you've listened to a lot of podcasts. What do you think are some of the more successful monetization strategies?
It's funny. I know what's not, or what feels like it's not.
Tell us what's not then. I love that, Alex. Go there.
It's so, if you're not the 1%er, right? If you're not a Russell Brand, Joe Rogan, Brene Brown, whoever these top 1%ers are, you don't get to put commercials for 5 minutes. Like no one cares. I don't think we like it when any of the famous people do it. But it's even more obnoxious when you're not there and we have to listen to this stuff. And especially if it just doesn't make sense, like you're a personal development, a spiritual guide, a Reiki healer, and you're hawking mattresses. Like, it makes me feel like you're in it for the wrong reasons. So like on my show, I think I have 2 commercials. One is for the personal development program that I went through that I wanted. They don't pay me for it. I wanted to do it because of the difference it made for me. And I think one is for my book, because I want people to know I have a book and I don't want to talk about it on every single episode. I've had people ask me to, hey, would you advertise for this thing? And I'm like, I just don't know. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like honest and true. It just feels like I'm trying to make a quick buck.
I feel that way about email sometimes. Like some people are really, they've got their whole email affiliate programs and strategies, and it's just not me. I worked really hard to get my client list, to get my subscribers to my show. And I don't know that I really want to just hawk anything. And so unless I feel really strongly like this is the best tool, the best thing I've ever used, and want to share that with you, I really don't know that I want to do it. I feel like podcast listeners, our audience, is more intimate. We feel like we owe them more, and they've been grateful to us in return because they've referred us and shared us and rated it and reviewed us.
Yeah. And I don't think it's like such not a wrong, right? If you go into a Home Depot, you're not like judging them for like the random things they sell that are like maybe feel cheap and like they're trying to get that extra $1 at the checkout line. But if I come into your mom and pop boutique store on Main Street, USA, and everything is homemade and like beautiful and nice, and then right up by the register, you have a bunch of cheap stuff that you ordered from online, from overseas, and it's just to get a couple bucks out of everyone, it's going to leave me with a like, wait, that store was kind of like cheesy and tacky. And I think that's the thing, is at the end of the day, I guess people have to decide what they want to be, right? Are you in it for the money and for like, because there's nothing wrong with that too, right? Home Depot, Lowe's, these are big stores. People, they're giving people jobs, they're making money, they provide things. And there's people that really like their local hardware store, that everybody knows you and it's really personal and they don't try to upsell you on anything. They're just there when you need them. But I think you have to kind of decide who you want to be. And it's like, what is monetization to? is it about actual money, or is it about something else? Could it be about, could you be monetizing through credibility? Could you be monetizing through notoriety? Like maybe people know who you are and respect you, but you actually don't make money from it. Maybe that's the currency that you trade in.
Right. Alternative monetization is what I call it here. And
Nice.
you were talking about, your speaking has improved. So maybe another alternative monetization is that you're trading in speaking opportunities that you're going to get because you have your podcast. So
Totally.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, I want to talk a little DreamMason though.
Sure.
So the name of the show kind of resonated with me because my father was actually a brick mason. So like my grandfather, my great grandfather, they all built chimneys and fireplaces and brick walls. And, today I can go back home to Connecticut and people will be like, your grandfather built that wall for me and stuff like that. So, there's something so solid about Mason. So tell me how you came up with the DreamMason name.
I wish it was more exciting. I wish I could tell you I was like on peyote in the middle of the desert and this thing hit me. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Unfortunately, and fortunately, when I started my own personal development journey and I started training as a coach, and I went through a super rigorous training. This was not like I left the restaurant hospitality world, put on a new hat and said, I'm a coach, let's go. I went through a year-long, very intensive training, personal development program. And in the beginning of that program, first couple months in, people were calling themselves life coaches or business coaches. And I didn't like either one. Like I thought that it's too much explaining. People don't know what these things are. They're confusing business coaches and consultants. Life coaches is like so woo-woo and like, who is someone to coach, right? And I'm not saying that's what either one of those are. It just didn't sit right. And I kept trying to think like, what do I want to call myself? Who do I want to work with? What do I want to call myself? And I kept coming back to this place. I remember I was sitting at my parents' house in Los Angeles. I was living in New York at the time and I was visiting like for the holidays. And I think I had like a month left as I was quitting my job and going full-time into coaching. And I was playing with a thesaurus and I was like looking up words for like visioning and dreams and all these things. And then I was looking up words for building, like to construct things, because I really had a clear vision that what I'm helping people do is craft whatever their dream is, right? We're not talking about it has to be like your lifelong dream. It could be like a dream for this year, a dream for this month. But what their dreams are, what they really want, said it's simpler. And that if whatever it is that you want, you're going to have to build it, right? It's not going to just land at your doorstep and you're just like, oh, well, yes, this is everything I wanted.
It's not like there's no heavy lifting, right? You never have to lift a brick and it happens to you.
Yeah. Right? And I think I've been talking a lot about this recently. There's a misnomer in manifestation, even that people are like, oh, I have to manifest that thing that I want. No, you also have to manifest the human that you're going to become to get that thing that you want, which no one really talks about. Like, hey, if I want to be a millionaire, I need to manifest me as a millionaire, and a millionaire would behave a certain way to go get that thing, right? If I want to be a podcaster, I have to start manifesting myself to show up in a certain way. And to me, that was that combination. It kind of hit really clear when it hit was like, oh, a dream mason, someone who builds dreams. And it seems so obvious, right? I was actually like, does this not exist? Like, why am I stumbling on this? But it kind of seemed like I did. And it became a thing. Now I don't walk around and tell people I'm a dream mason. It kind of started to feel like a little obnoxious.
But this is the thing I want everybody out there to listen to, because sometimes I don't criticize anyone's show name on the show. Like, while you're here, you're my guest, so I wouldn't criticize it. Yours is great. So like, there's no criticism necessary, but I want to point out why it's good, because I think that people can learn from that, because I do hear a lot of really bad show names, and some really, really bad ones. But when you have a name like the Dream Mason, is that it's great for attracting guests, because the guests can maybe believe in themselves as like, maybe I'm a dream builder, so yeah, I belong on this show. That sounds like a really great, a great attraction point. And then from that standpoint, but it can also be used to refer to you, like if you were being announced at, as the keynote speaker at an event, right? So it applies in both ways. And that's a really great place to be when you have a name that has that. And then your audience is sitting back going, yeah, that's what I want to build the dream,
Yeah.
right? And I need a guide. I need the Dream Mason to guide me. And it might be you and your guests doing that for me.
Totally.
So that's where it has this universal appeal in its name, and it becomes a perfect name to utilize for a show.
Thanks. I love that.
Yeah. Well, before we go, I want to make sure that we get some last minute, advice to those aspiring podcasters. And you were just talking about something that I totally love. A lot of times people come to me and because they want my help launching or setting up and doing all the show, doing their show, and there's a to-do list, right? They want to know what the to-do list is, but I love the idea of the to-be list. So could you give our audience some advice? If you're aspiring to be a podcaster, you haven't pulled the trigger yet, you haven't built that podcast dream yet, what do you need to be, Alex, to be a good podcast host?
I love how you said it. I think you could apply this to anything, not just podcasting, but I would say you need to start with the thing you want to create. Hey, what do I want? Right. Well, we're talking about podcasting. So what's the show that I want? And is the show that I want like a show that I talk a lot in terms when I talk about podcasting, I use TV shows because people know them more. Do you want a show like The Wire? Do you want a show like Seinfeld? Do you want a show like Curb Your Enthusiasm? Or do you want like a cartoon like The Simpsons? What's the energy of the thing that you want? What's the way the audience that would watch that kind of show, but really have a clear vision of, I want a podcast that would be like this. And then who do you have to be to create that show, right? You can't, the same person in theory, right? It's not to say that they can't. The same person who does The Simpsons probably isn't doing The Wire or like a Godfather kind of movie, right? It's just, it could be, it's possible, but likely they're different audiences, they're different people, they're different age ranges. And we could get even more specific, right? Like we could say like The Godfather and Oprah.
Very different.
Totally. And so the type of person you'd have to be to create an Oprah-like show or to create a Godfather-like show or, whatever would have to be, you'd have to generate yourself as a different type of human being, which means your behavior, your tone, your energy, the way you're creative. And then I would say, what are the actions that have to be taken from that way of being?
Mm. And do you want that? Because sometimes you might not want that, right?
Totally. And that's what I think where it starts is what do we want? And then who would we have to be? And look, we can apply this to anything. If you tell me that you want to be married or you want to be president, the way you'd have to be is very, very different. It's not close. It's not to say that they don't have some overlapping characteristics, right? You'd want people to like you in theory. But there is very overlapping characteristics. And then the way that you would take action would be so different, right? If I say to you, I need to be a person who's fun and adventurous, or I need to be a person who's logistical. Well, the actions I would take from those two different places are completely different actions.
Right. Well, Alex, you've built a great show. Your dream of podcasting certainly turned into a great 200 plus reality here. And I really enjoy hearing all of the experiments that you're going through, both online as I'm watching you on social and on your show. And I look forward to really seeing what that experiment is going to be for you next. I can't wait to hear what that is. And we might have to have you back and let you know and tell us all about what that next experiment did for us.
Thanks. Appreciate you. Thanks for having me on.
I'm really glad that I got a chance to talk to Alex Terranova, the Dream Mason, right? The DreamMason Podcast. He was so open and sharing and just really gave us really great insights and answered all my questions in great detail, which I really appreciate, because I have like a giant page of notes that I took because I was really trying to dive into why he was doing some things. And his show has been such an experiment. I mean, really, it's the DreamMason experiment, which is what I think it really is. So, it's so nice to see that experimentation going around in the way that he tries out the microdoses, and then he tries out, doing different things. He tries out different types of guests. He tries out different types of openings. He's just constantly experimenting with his show, pulling through and coming to things and keeping the things that are working and then revamping and revitalizing the things that aren't. That's just the makings of a great show in the long run. And who doesn't want to be along as a listener for the ride of that? Because you see him working so hard on his show, right? You see that as things change. You're like, yeah, that wasn't so good. And as the listener, but we put up with a lot when we really enjoy our hosts or we're really getting a lot out of what they do well. And there's a lot that he does really well, right? And has done very well from the beginning. And so you take that but then you see him improve. And that just gives you more impetus to be around for the next episode, to give him credit for all that work that he's doing for you, the listener. It really shows that he's focused on that listener. And that's so absolutely important at the end of the day, is that when I'm listening to a show, I feel like it's about me and not about you, the host, right? At the end of the day, Alex Terranova is making the DreamMason podcast. He's building it brick by brick, building it up piece by piece. But he's not afraid to tear down a little section if needed and rebuild it to make it right for the listener. So some great lessons from Alex. I so appreciate him coming on the show. You're going to want to check out the DreamMason podcast. DreamMason is one word. Make sure you search for it that way. And subscribe, check it out. If you enjoy it, share it with other people, share it with someone who might get a benefit out of that kind of inspiration and that kind of vision for how you might build your dreams, just like Alex has done for himself. So I, of course, always put everything at thebingefactor.com. There's some interesting things going on at the Binge Factor that I want to make you aware of. There's the Binge Factor media page, right? Because we're doing sort of more of a media oversight group, more of a network model. So the Binge Factor Media actually is what it's called, bingefactormedia.com. That can take you to the homepage. And I have both the Next Little Thing and the Binge Factor running together. They're all running together in the blog there and in the episodes. So you'll be able to see both of them combined side by side. So we're really looking at people and products at the same time, or lots of cool little things at the same time. So there's some fun things going on there. But don't forget that you can find every podcaster, including Alex Terranova. You can find links to them straight from the blog post. So if you can't remember, but you remember what we were talking about and you can't remember the person's name, that's the place to go. All you got to do is remember thebingefactor.com or bingefactormedia.com and you can go right there. Thanks everyone for listening. Really appreciate you. And make sure to suggest some questions, some shows, some other shows that you would like me to feature here on the Binge Factor. I appreciate you and look forward to bringing you even more great podcasters as we hit the end of the year here.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.